The Dane Tops Letter, 1982. Hello, I am a highly trained OT and a staff member. I want to talk to all my friends and hope you will circulate this comm to others and get in better comm from it. I believe the current problems in the C of S are due to a completely hidden third party who is the source of trouble. Please bear me out. The apparency of the problem is between the field, including splinter groups, and the management, including the financial police. The current opposition between these factions has caused untold devastation to the church. However, I believe neither side is the source of trouble, although each side believes the other side is source. I do not know who this hidden Joe is, but it has been there a very long time. A complete data analysis should go back at least to 1965, when ethics conditions first came out, possibly earlier. Since 1965 forward, one can view the use of heavy force to control, fear tactics, and physical restraint, etc. Those who were there remember the inception of these methods. From that time forward, one finds the misuse of ethics conditions on persons with great interbulation resulting. One finds additives to the ethics conditions in the form of make-wrong mechanisms, including outright physical body punishment. One finds ARCXs occurring, some severe enough to cause former upstats to leave altogether. It is true that some people left before this time, but it was due to the case strain from running research processes. So from 1965 on, we find individuals who had heavy force used against them or who were assigned wrong conditions, then made wrong about the wrong condition. An example of grossly applied wrong ethics was when John McMaster was thrown overboard on the flagship, broke his arm on the way down and made to tread water for 3 hours while begging to be pulled in, as he did have a broken arm. McMaster left Scientology because of misuse of ethics, and no one ever got back this chief spokesperson, a top-class 8 auditor. This public opinion leader was responsible for thousands of people coming into Scientology. This is one example, but this sort of thing happened to many persons. Every few years, a new wide-scale internal suppression arises. When the protest becomes too great, everyone involved plus a few scapegoats are declared as source. But then the cycle repeats itself 2 or so years later, and a new wide-scale horror story of some other misused force comes up. The why of this occurrence is never found. The stories are there, but let it be said that an era started in which the idea of using force rather than ARC seems to have been introduced about that time, resulting in various dramatizations, each followed by a cleanup attempt. The cleanups, although correcting the existing scenes at the time, rarely went back and picked up the pieces, i.e. the keyed-in, blown Scientologists, or the ones who had reduced their size and sphere of influence as a result of the force used on them. Amnesties were an attempt to bring the people back, but the majority did not come back on the amnesty, as the amnesty did not indicate the correct BPC the people were sitting in. Thus, Scientology did not keep its people. The turnover of staff became a routine joke. The highly dedicated, most able were left behind. Thousands of excellent auditors, CSEs, SUPs, and admin personnel who would have stayed indefinitely for low pay and long hours were left behind after each of these third dynamic dramatizations of purifying the organization. Very able tech terminals and record stat producing people such as John McMaster and Rocky Stump do not suddenly turn SP, nor were they SP all along, but finally found out. A true SP would never have been able to produce phenomenal stats over a long period of time, and of course could never have been able to duplicate and use the tech, nor embody the spirit of Scientology. The idea that a person could do this, and then suddenly, after many years of such service, show his true colors, is as erroneous as it is absurd. Something happened to these guys. They can be fixed, but it is done. Prior stats are not viewed. Only some current situation. The basic goodness of a person is not viewed, just the current ristim, then the attempt to destroy it, because it is in theta. We do not perceive the source of the fellow going south. Actions against people are justified by the use of the concept that it wouldn't be that way if he hadn't pulled it in. Eval, an invalid. This concept of unreasonableness has been interpreted to mean that the person is not to be duplicated as to sequence he went through so as to arrive in such a situation. Thus, no true understanding exists. Without true understanding, the solution is bound to be destructive. Let us go back to the famous meeting that took place on Flag at the end of 1981. That meeting took some days and it was hot and heavy. In that meeting, 40-plus top stat-producing mission holders grouped together in a room on Flag, and they placed Flag management in a lower condition. They told the management that if the situation was not corrected, there were going to be splinter groups. They explained that there was a very, very large disconnected ARCXN field out there. They explained that the suits against the church were the church's failure to handle. This enturbulated some of the Flag management, and rightly so, because it was a wrong condition and indication. The visible Flag management was not in a lower condition according to the data they had. Neither were the mission holders in a lower condition. In fact, neither party was at fault, although both thought that the other was. In spite of the enturbulation caused to Flag management from being assigned a wrong condition, the two groups started to calm and events started to occur to clean up the problems. The mission holders and other leaders were allowed to set up an office in FOLO. The mission holders heard the cases of hundreds of Scientologists who were inactive, Chakshur offlines, ARCXN, sitting for years in a misassigned condition, etc. These people were contacted through public meetings held by the leaders. The meetings were hot and heavy because each of the attending persons was loaded with his own personal BPC from his own lost bridge. Through the meetings, lines were established, and each person was sent to the FOLO office so that the time and care needed for a personalized handle could be given and the people gotten back on the bridge. These meetings were open to anyone and everyone, no matter how long they had been out of the church and no matter what they had done. Needless to say, the meetings were absolutely packed with highly trained OTs and ex-staff who were all inactive in PT. Over 20 inactive Class 8s were rehabbed the first month. The second major stat of these meetings was that people suing the C of S were contacted by the leaders of the meetings and other volunteers. The list was given to the mission holders. So obviously there was some cooperation going on, as well as permission to set up the office in FOLO. It was discovered that each of these suits boiled down to non-delivery of the bridge. In other words, someone paid money but left at the end of the service in an ARCX about the delivery. It was found that each of these persons cleaned up easily on two-way comm and proper indications and otherwise standard tech, and that they dropped the suit. Over 70 suits were contacted. In these meetings, a lot of charge came off. Some people came out of curiosity and got charged because they hadn't known about the upsets that existed. The huge majority of tone, however, was of relief. Great relief, because one could say anything. Be act. Listened to without a vowel. The person then was given a line to handle their grievance. That line was helpful, not evaluative, and interested only in getting them back on the bridge. That line was willing to take the time and space to do what needed to be done, at no money charge, and that line was not willing to waste people, nor were they desirous of it. That line also had the beginnings of authority to publicly indicate past slanders of persons by wrong conditions assignments, an action necessary to fully blow the charge for the person and the group. Also, these mission holders were highly trained people, thus able to assess what would look to a lower trained person like only natter. Rather than natter, an unbiased trained person sees out lists, wrong Ys, MWHs of nothing, wrong condition assignment, and ARCX on not theirness, BPC, etc., etc., etc. With only the use of all ARCX stem from MWHs, and not all the tech on MWHs and ARCX, an untrained person would not, of course, be able to bring all persons in trouble to an assness. So even without doing a lot of auditing on the inactive Scientologist, these meetings were producing a phenomenon in the field. A few thousand members worldwide turned up in a few short weeks, with many more on the way as the word got out. Also, the people threatening to splinter joined to help. Thus, a great resurgence of hope that the church would stay in one piece took place. All this happened in the beginning of 1982. Fact, up to this time, there was only one major splinter group delivering the bridge, including the OT levels, to the public. That group is run by Larry West, a Class 8. It is located in San Diego. Fact, in March 1982, a series of declares started. First, each of the leaders running the rehabilitation meetings was declared, unless they stopped. Second, those people in management, including the ED int who were in comm with the field, were declared. Third, the GO was declared almost totally as a whole group. Fact, after this date and consistently over this past year, splinter groups have been forming practically by the week. They are delivering the OT levels and NOTS. In short, the top management, the top field auditors, the top tech persons, and the GO were all declared at one time with one fell swoop. And for the first time ever, many were illegally declared, i.e., no ComEv, no proof, no verification, and often completely surprising those declared because there was no prior notice or discussion. Others had ComEvs after being declared. When something was printed up about these declared persons, it was done in such generalities that it wasn't possible to tell what these persons were supposed to have done. No time, place, form, or event, no specifics. All the hundreds of people in the process of coming back on lines went back off lines. All the recently rehabbed Class 8s and lower-level auditors went back off lines. The attitude generally in this group was, "I told you so." They had been convinced it was going to work, just started to believe it, and then had the people helping them declared. Not only did this affect these recently rehabbed persons, but it affected everyone because the declared people were the leaders of the orgs, the leaders of the tech, and the leaders of the field. Therefore, other splinter groups formed by persons who had not previously even considered such an action. They decided to get away from the confusion so they could audit and train in peace. It is time to define the difference between a splinter group and a squirrel group. Squirreling means altering Scientology. Look it up in the dictionary. A squirrel group alters LRH tech and does not produce the products of the bridge. A splinter group is on source with LRH tech, admin, and ethics, and produces the same products as any on-source Scientology org. However, a splinter group operates outside the jurisdiction of the main organization because of disagreements they have tried to handle, but failed. It is time to understand the reality of the splinter group, or their escalation will only continue. We cannot handle what we do not understand, and the component parts of understanding are affinity, reality, and communication. A survey of splinter groups turned up common realities such as, "Oh, can't make a living with prices I was forced to charge. Oh, had to leave the church to continue to audit full-time. Oh, I was spending all my time handling misuse of ethics and tech on others, so I left so I could have clean products all the way through. Why should I spend all my time making money when everyone here is willing to tech exchange the whole bridge? Oh, here I can audit and train full-time and do the upper bridge too. Oh, the persons I most admired were declared and my faith was shattered. Oh, we tried everything we could to stay in. Oh, the first thing we audit on people is the loss they have and the charge they have about the craziness in the church. And we have not been able to change the church, but we sure can pump out those well-done auditing hours." There are now over 20 major splinter groups in the US and several dozen more forming. I do not have the stats outside this country. At least 7 of these groups offer the full bridge and are run by highly trained Class 8s through 12s. The prices for OT levels range from $1,000 to $5,000 and NOTS prices vary. Also, some accept barter and some accept payments while you are there doing the service. No one is making a lot of profit, but the production is high. This progression of splinter groups started right after the first sweep of declares. For a while in 1982, there was no apparent management in Scientology because the past leaders were wiped out. There was a lot of confusion. However, and this is one big point of this dissertation, the truth is there was a management the whole time before, during, and after these events, and it was and still is entirely hidden from us all. This hidden management had the power to declare hundreds of key posts in opinion leaders and got away with it. Then a new org board was formed, previously uninvolved, so members were chosen to occupy the posts of the new org boards. These persons were not previously involved with what happened before. They were not there to see the sequence of how the splinter groups were formed. Instead, they were told that squirrel groups were a source of the chaos, not a result of it. They were told the prior leaders in splinter groups were stealing from Scientology and were the source of the problem. Criminality was the why, and the handle was to prosecute in the U.S. courts of law. There are many other false concepts that have been given to the RTC and FP. The MUs and false data and complete lack of prior situation that led to this mess are not known by these new org board people. Their power comes from the fact that they are truly dedicated, caring Scientologists. The misuse of power comes from MUs that were put there by someone who hated that person. The same WHO who authorized getting rid of everyone who used to run things. The same WHO that sets the policies of the RTC and gives it its power. Thus, an enormous worldwide ridge has developed between the so-called management and management-oriented persons and the field, meaning everyone else. Each thinks the other is causing it. Each cares desperately, and they are destroying each other. The best tech terminals we had are now criminals. Our most inspiring leaders are outcasts. Everyone is losing, even though there are many who avoided all this and continue to win. But the third dynamic is in civil war. As in all wars, there is a third party. Perhaps it is someone close to Ron who causes wrong decisions. Or perhaps Ron is completely uninvolved and there is a hidden control group. But there is one. There is a hidden data line, and it is not anyone we are looking at. Perhaps different persons have occupied this hidden post over the years, but the post has been filled. We are so locked into putting the blame on the wrong terminals that we find it hard to realize we have judged each other wrongly. We have all done it, with a few exceptions, and we have all hurt each other badly. Some say it is irreparable this time. I say there is a Y, also a WHO. Illegal declares and other pertinent data. A recent ASHO posting announced there were over 600 declares in the past recent months. Many of these were declared before ComEv. Some were declared for opposing management opinion about how things should be done. Others for unproven or unidentified points. Most list completely generalized charges with no specific account of what the person did. It has even gone so far as to list sexual behavior, such as adultery, as part of the reason this person is now considered to be a suppressive person, deserving of being expelled from the church. Over 50 field auditors, CSEs, and whole field groups in LA have terminated their practice in the last 6 months because their delivery lines were shut down by the new unwritten policies and by policies written by someone other than Ron. Specifically, in 1 week, all field ethics delivery and admin scale delivery was forbidden and still is all done verbally. Those who questioned it were placed under immediate ethics investigation, so everyone else shut up. All volunteer minister actions have been verbally forbidden to the field, and the policy that the field could set its own rates for those actions was verbally canceled. Any credit or barter, formerly okay for VM in Book 1, was also forbidden. Plus, Book 1 auditing was now supposed to be sold in intensives. In addition, the field auditors, like the missions, see Mission Holders Conference San Francisco, late '82, were fined $10,000 for every PC they had done actions on after the person had reached clear. The field, like the mission holders, were told if they'd done this, they were criminals and were guilty of the crime of having ripped off the orgs of their rightful public. As none of this was clearly written, communicated, or defined prior, most missions and field auditors had inadvertently become criminals. Prosecution was threatened for anyone who didn't pay up. Frightened, auditors and missions called their people and dropped them in the middle of admin scales, repairs, ethics, grades, etc. Thus, thousands of public ARCX occurred on losing their terminals. So the field went into the woodwork and the missions went frantic, trying to dig up funds already dispersed for services already delivered. The field auditors were to be charged $10,000 per clear, even if the amount accepted from a clear was only $10. See Mission Holders Conference SF, 7 November 82/SCED 2104. Plus, the missions were to pay for any SO missions at the rate of $15,000 per day if the SO deemed it necessary to investigate them, whether they were found guilty of anything or not. The small number of auditors left in the field were caused to turn away half of their clients and income. See above. Simultaneously, a 10% tax was demanded of their remaining income, and thus field groups were driven out of activity. Several have just moved out of town. Some long-standing high-volume producers have been declared suppressive without ComEv. One is Trey Lotz. Some have notified the church they are leaving, but will continue to deliver standard Scientology. Tech, L and T Greenberg. Others no longer being able to make a living delivering tech, changed professions, and stayed in the church. A survey has turned up the overwhelming reality that missions and field auditors felt they had a choice of staying in the church, but having to give up their professional Scientology careers, or of leaving the church or so they could afford to deliver Scientology, secure in knowing they could count on being able to continue to deliver it. In fact, they felt more secure facing a potential suit from the church than they did in the church, knowing their certs could be instantly suspended with no ethics protection of proper on-policy procedures. Now there is a pitifully small number of field auditors remaining, and they've joined iHelp. It is not only the field that has been unmocked from these non-LRH policies and orders. Last year, hundreds of SO and non-SO personnel holding org posts in the PAC area alone were offloaded simultaneously with no provisions for qualified replacements. This included our most important tech posts, such as the Class 8 courses and lower org internship subs. All non-SO staff working for some pay were offloaded with no replacement provision. Now, 1 year later, key posts remain unmanned. Not only was the Class 8 course SUP offloaded with no replacement, even the Class 8 confidential course room became used for sessions, and the students on the confidential course were ordered to study their confidential packs in the non-confidential course rooms. ARCX and complaining students were sent to ethics if they didn't go along with it. Naturally, some students blew. This is just one of the many unmocked areas that occurred in the spring and summer of 1982 during the wholesale offloading of staff. The Class 8 SUP, by the way, was a good SUP and offloaded only because she wasn't SO. As the non-SO staff were paid salaries, this offloading was supposed to be a cost cutter, so money was actually the whole issue in point. Such an issue, in fact, that it took precedence over keeping the major courses of orgs intact at all. These days, the SO, many SO were also offloaded, is hurting for staff and going into heavy-handed recruitments. They also have been forced to hire back some non-SO staff, particularly tech staff, as tech has been one of the more heavily com-eved areas of the SO. Over 10 missions and orgs have openly left Scientology because they could not afford to pay the fines levied on them in the San Francisco Mission Holders Conference of November 7, 1982. You must read this to understand fully what has happened. Other missions have left because they were unwilling to continue under a management that used threats and force to control them and which accused them of being criminals. Reading a copy of this meeting will make it plain why there is a large and growing exodus from the church. The leaders and even the CSN have been influenced away from the very most fundamental concepts and principles of Scientology, influenced by someone into actually believing that force, threats, and punishment drive mechanisms will create a product. This non-Scientology technique has created a reaction of recoil away from the church, and that reaction is in proportion to the out-of-ARC force that was used. Fortunately, you can get a copy of this meeting and verify the data here. The persons who delivered the meeting have an MU to such a degree about the workability of their methods that they are actually proud of the disgracing document and want it to be distributed and read. If you absolutely can't locate a copy, send me $5 and I will send one to you. To understand and have ARC for the out-of-ARC force, you will find it is necessary to use your tech. This means recognizing that anyone seeking to control you unworkably has an MU on how to do it. This has happened in the current management. The MU added to a wrong data analysis and wrong why of what they consider the problems to be, criminality within church, etc., explains why and how it is that they have acted in a manner to create the opposites of their intentions. Who had the MU in the first place is another question. 20 groups, including some entire missions and orgs that seceded, are now delivering or preparing to deliver the entire bridge at reasonable prices, and more such groups are in the making. The tech delivery is by X-Org and SO Class 8s to 12s. The tech is standard. These people have concluded that the main church is not salvageable and that Scientology will be salvaged by such groups. Their reality is that free enterprise must exist in order to get auditing delivered in volume, and that it is okay to charge what you want and need to survive and produce in volume, even if it is far lower than the church rates. The dedication to LRH in these groups is high, just as high as it was when these persons worked in the AOs and at FLAG. Illegal and unjust declares of upstat Scientologists have crashed their businesses when that business was Scientology run or Scientology supported. No thought is given such persons when the declare comes down. It is said by finance police that we must safeguard the group first and pick up the individuals later. Is the church going to repay the thousands of dollars of loss to those persons whose businesses suffered or crashed due to illegal or unjust declares? Persons who are Scientologists, who are also professionals in an area which helps others, are being attacked for altered or squirrel tech. The viewpoint is that Scientology is the only knowledge that helps people, and other technologies which pretend to do so are suppressive or invalid. This is very erroneous, as there are many people with technologies which are of proven help to others, and the persons using them are kindred souls to ourselves. When such a person uses Scientology to improve his own tech, such as a priest using it in a sermon, a medic teaching and using it in emergency medicine, a chiropractor using it to give a better adjustment, ad infinitum, this should be good, not squirrel. Scientology should be used in all of life. There is no activity or profession that its principles could not be successfully interwoven into, thus improving it. An extremely destructive idea has crept into the church in the last year. It is a new idea in Scientology, utterly foreign to all its 35 years. That idea is that the tech can be very dangerous and harmful and do untold damage if even the slightest of MUs accompany its use. Fear of doing harm is being instilled in those who have remained in the church, and the idea that KSW consists of an unrelenting robotic attention to outnesses. The study tapes thoroughly describe the demise of any subject when is made too dangerous to use. The following may be found in 88008, 880, and the early PDCs. The aesthetic feeling of tone 40 unreasonableness is the clue to the beingness that has taken over the management, and it is this beingness that management is now attempting to create in others. As there is such a great aestheticness to the feeling of total tone 40 unreasonableness, it becomes almost impossible to see the effect of this beingness once one is viewing life through it. This is the mechanism through which heinous acts may be committed by good beings. Because the being is attached to the aesthetic, he goes along with the rest of what went with that aesthetic and is actually blind to the actual consequences of his actions. The end can also justify the means when one has a great enough aesthetic attached. Thus, such a thing can actually occur where persons in rousing agreement with the aesthetic of keeping Scientology, working at all costs, then take part in purifying Scientology. They buy the idea that time is scarce, there is great danger, there isn't time for routine justice actions. They buy the idea that they can afford to make mistakes and fix them later. The group aesthetic of purifying becomes mob-like, and the momentum of the group carries it forward. Only when there is no one left to remove, when too many posts become unmanned or improperly manned, when stats crash, does the aesthetic lift enough to start to see that some really pretty heavy disaster has taken place. When one has become the effect of such an aesthetic beingness, he is likely to believe he has seen the light, and all others who do not share the beingness become the unenlightened. As far as duplication, the beingness acts as a set of blinders on a horse. One cannot actually duplicate anyone who doesn't share the beingness, because the beingness is an additive to the COM formula. In Scientology, the purify the tech. Beingness that is being instilled is having the effect of separating and individuating people from all those who don't have the same beingness, whether the others are delivering standard tech or not. This arbitrary beingness that is being mocked up and demanded is one of the biggest additives in Scientology, and it is lowering duplication. The idea of using Scientology in conjunction with other texts being mixed practices is the other great additive. For if this was indeed true, Scientology has just ended right here and now. The current idea is that the bridge is Scientology, and that is where we use Scientology. We don't deliver it with a particular slant into the reality of an athlete or a doctor. This would be mixing practices, a great and threatening danger. Yet Scientology should be combined with everything, and if an expert in a field improves his field through Scientology and teaches that to non-Scientologists in the field, that is good, not squirrel. It is not dangerous. There is no terrible thing that will happen to others. If such a person had a principle inadequately calmed, then he would be happy to be crammed, as it would improve his product. But the idea that the activity itself is squirrel demonstrates a total MU on the concept of mixing practices or altering Scientology. The ability to match realities to duplicate is of prime importance in Scientology. We are condemning those who do it. We have made it a crime to teach anyone anything to do with Scientology. The verbal tech HCOB was never intended to be used in this way. If we are so terribly afraid that our smallest communication of a Scientology datum or idea will constitute the demise of some fellow, we would have no self-ability to judge or evaluate both abilities, which must be gradiently acquired if one intends to be free. We have become so fearful of the terrible consequences of out-tech that the tech is going off the lines of communication and mutual interchange. The lie is that it ever would have been that terrible, provided the orgs kept their standards in. The wrong handling behind that is that squirreling is a major problem that needed handling, when it was actually a matter of administrative disagreements and power struggles in management. To go deeper, money is a very big issue here. The church now wants to tax all persons who help others using all or part of Scientology for profit. If Scientology was being allowed the freedom it actually needs to ever be a force in the culture, this taxation would be impossible to regulate because everybody would end up making profits through the use of Scientology and through teaching it to others. Any professional would feel desire to impart it to others in his profession and would disseminate it or give it to others. Eventually, all such contacted persons would go to orgs, but first they would learn Scientology within their own activities. But such a vision could never take place with a church paranoid about being ripped off, attempting to tax all such use. Someone in our church is very, very concerned about money. Someone has spread the idea that the church's members are rampant with financial averts and outright criminality, and that someone is demanding funds. In trying to get money, that someone has handed down policies, orders, and declares in a Tone 40 aesthetic package that has wreaked havoc on us. Only medical doctors are seen as immune of this other practices idea, as Ron has sanctioned them as useful on the bridge. When others ARCX with the idea that they have mixed practices by using Scientology, it is seen as proof of their overt, so sec checks are demanded. Cramming cycles for MU cleanups are not the rule, as sec checks are in. Apple School has recently been attacked by an actual raid by church officials on its premises. Once again, the issue turned out to be money. A portion of the Apple School income was demanded for the right to use LRH tech. When one of the school heads asked to see this in writing, it was called a non-compliance and a sec check was demanded of the school's officials. Persons are blowing because the policy on ethics gradients is not applied. Persons are blowing because ethics are being applied when not called for. Then they ARCX. Then they are accused of missed withholds. Then they are told to come up with thousands of dollars to clean up their own overts and MWs. Then they leave, because a wary Scientologist secretly taped the blatant off-PL actions of a member of the FP and sent that tape to many people. And because on top of that, a SO member from the LA area went personally to the CSN and spent hours talking to him about the rabble caused in LA by this particular member of the FP, the management has been forced to recall and take action with that person, Don Larson. However, such a reprimand will not correct the situations in this letter. Don Larson is not an SP any more than the others who share the beingness that has been taught to them as the way to make Scientology work. He is only being recalled because his actions were secretly taped so could not be denied, although before knowing about the tape, a report was written that denied the very things on that tape. 10 years ago, when the prices were lower, the field did not use credit and barter as a rule. When the prices were raised, the field resorted to more and more credit and barter, not having training to fall back on as the orgs did. Using credit and barter, some field practice, not all by a long shot, stayed in existence no matter what happened to the prices. Missions, too, resorted to hidden financial means in order to make it possible to continue to service a broad public. As so many thousands of Scientologists were dead, stopped on the bridge when the price-raising practice came about, these persons were more than happy to take advantage of some other way to pay besides money up front. An example of hidden financial methods and missions is Carl Barney's phony loans for PCs setup. Across the world, persons who desired to audit resorted to offline practices in order to stay active. These practices were withholds from the orgs justified by the field as necessary to stay in business. The orgs and field got very stingy about anyone who might have enough money to pay, as such were the minority of the public. So animosity and competition festered between the two. Org registrars would fume at losing a prospect to a field auditor who gave a better deal, and this brought on the enforcement of the 2-year rule. But the problem was actually too few prospects with enough money. Eventually, thousands of Scientologists became inactive due to price increases and are still so. The running record that Regis grew sick of was, "But to make that much money, I'd already have to be OT." It's a vicious circle. A 10-year examination of statistics show that although at sometimes GI has temporarily gone up from price increases, the numbers of persons being delivered to, proportionate to staff, has decreased. Those who were around remember the once crowded course rooms of the LA orgs, the BC on Temple Street, and the Class 8 course with Sylvester running it. In 1970, the LA org was so full that they burst their seams, having to be packed back-to-back in the CS room in Qual. The amount of course room space the LA org uses in its complex headquarters is actually less footage than it was in the old LA org, and the student flow by comparison is a mere dribble. The bridge cost about $5,000 back then. It is interesting that financial overts is one of the big whys being given us for all the declares. The original financial overt was to raise the prices and cause inactive Scientologists and turn off the public. The crimes that person have committed to try to get their own bridges or continue to deliver it to others may or may not have actually been harmful, depending on the individual circumstances in each case. But one thing is obvious: such crimes occurred in an attempt to handle pricing policy that not eyes the natural economic laws for maintaining solvency. And try as we did, not a one of us ever was able to find out what person made the decisions on pricing. There was never a who. Although widespread disagreement with pricing has existed a long time, the demand for money has especially stepped up in the last year, ever since the release of the Financial Irregularities PL. In one of the former third dynamic engrams of our church, HCO SEK checks and enforced disconnections brought outrage to Scientologists. It was not nearly as severely enforced as today, and SEK checks were not charged for. But there was still huge outrage and protest. In 1968, the church was reformed, and it promised through Ron that these two actions would never be done again by the church. Even Weber, today's president of the church, went on the public media to state this promise. Today, the church is breaking Ron's promise to us and charging you for it to boot. Furthermore, if a SEC check is to be done, it is supposed to be done in the HGC, not the HCO. And it is Tech and Qual that decide on the advisability of SEC checks after case folder study. HCO is not qualified to make that decision. Today, Tech and Qual are not even consulted, and SEC checks are automatic for whole groups of people. Persons are being ordered to have them for voicing disagreements, and no one has even looked at the fellow's folder. Standard Tech is being driven out of Tech and Qual, and arbitrary decisions are taking precedence over the CSCs and the orgs. Unfortunately, I cannot mail this to all the key SO and org staff members, as it would not be delivered to them by the ComDep. The staff is well shielded from the facts and are well insulated by false pictures of what's happening in Scientology. Because of that well-ingrained false picture, ridges develop. Only continued calm can dispel those ridges. They are not there because someone doesn't care, but because of misinformation. Therefore, it must be up to each of us to communicate, to find out the truth and exchange data any way we can. It is up to us to refuse to cut our comm lines with one another and to find out ourselves if what we've heard and been told about others is true. The idea that it is dangerous to communicate because outtech may occur has become so prevalent that Scientologists are actually volunteering to cut comm lines, so this won't happen. This fear became so instilled in the Matlocks that they shut down the who, what, where, the survival comm line and connection line of LA, providing theta connection and exchange between Scientologists, and better survival for us all. This way of thinking is utterly un-Scientology, but because it is being done in the name of saving Scientology, People are convinced and are agreeing to cut comm lines and communication lines so that bad things don't have a line to flow on. Scientology, its very essence, its most basic fundamentals, its very reason for working, is being tampered with here. A monumental misunderstood is being transferred to Scientologists, and it is so large it has overwhelmed the connection to Ron. Ron would never give less communication and no communication as solutions for the problems we are handling. Ron would tell you to increase communication and increase ARC. Ron would never tell us to handle in theta by stopping our theta activities. He would say to increase the theta activities and put your attention on creating that which you wish to be there. I have deliberated a long time before deciding to include the following information, but have decided that only by truth is there a chance. You can verify this story if you take the time to do so. 22-year-old David Miscavige is the visible head of the church at this time. There is also Pat and Ann Broker, who are never mentioned and are more hidden. Others who appear to be running the church are also extremely young and often not trained in red on white. Yet these people are making the decisions about the technical expertise of long-standing tech terminals, with decades of stats behind them showing their worth. The same goes for the top admin figures, i.e., the youngsters are the apparent ones with the authority to have the admin and tech persons of long-standing declared. David is likely to be ComEv'd as the obvious scapegoat. However, simply removing the youngsters would not give us necessarily the source of their actions against the leaders of Scientology, as they could just be replaced by whoever it is who is giving them their orders. These youngsters have been convinced their actions are saving Scientology. Before the RTC was formed, David Miscavige had a mysterious authority over the CMO, the Watchdog Committee, Flag, and all other orgs. He had no known post on the org board, and there was no command channel line. David implemented the joint ComEv of David Mayo, Gleason, Horwitz, father of Ron's grandchild, Peter Warren, Diana's right-hand man, before she left the SO and stopped appearing at events, Buchanan, etc., the 16 top execs and tech terminals. See RTC Conditions Order I, 9th October, 82. This coup was accomplished by removing these persons from the Flag land base to the secret headquarters in Gilman Hot Springs, Riverside County, California. These executives, David Mayo included, were locked up and held under physical restraint from leaving. They were awoken in the middle of the night and interrogated many times. Brainwashing techniques of getting each to confess to the crimes of the other were employed until there was little drive left to go back and take up their posts. After months of being held, these persons are now in various places around the country, destimulating. This is not the only incident of its kind. Ron predicts this would be done in Scientology and PDC number 20. The church has already started legal proceedings against Don Will, the CO of one of the seceding orgs. It is the contention of the splinter groups that the C of S cannot win rights to a monopoly over a religious practice due to the U.S. Constitution guarantee of religious freedom. Whether the C of S wins over its dissatisfied ex-members or not, we will all lose. We will lose because no one here is contesting the validity of standard tech or of the bridge, only the rights and freedoms of those delivering it. In other words, the argument is not over alteration of LRH tech, but over non-LRH written orders, policies, procedure, and controls. Thus, we have groups of dedicated Scientologists who will be going to court against one another over who has the right to promote and deliver standard tech. Also, even if the C of S wins, it will only cause more splinter groups who will simply avoid the trademark usage. As the splinter groups will force the C of S into higher and higher courts on the grounds that an American may freely practice his own religion, the case could conceivably go to the highest court of the land. There, the issue would be forced. Does religious freedom exist, or, when religion is highly priced, can a monopoly exist? Just suppose, due to the tenor of the times, Reagan fundamentalist Christianity, the highly unlikely ruling occurred that limited the U.S. constitutional rights of complete religious freedom to all Americans through some technicality such as a trademark or other. Our church as a whole would then have succeeded in establishing a constitutional compromise that would end religious freedom in our country. When we have failed to use our own technology of communication and duplication to such a degree that we have to publicly air our difficulties in the courts we have failed indeed. When trained Scientologists do not use the tech of assessness with one another, how can we possibly expect to use it on the psychotics and true SPs of the world, or even on the average Joe with his widely diverging realities and practices? We will never clear the planet when we cannot even settle things amongst ourselves without the use of a non-Scientologist arbitrator and enforcer. As such an action further discredits us in the eyes of the public, it makes laughable our claims to possession of the full communication tech as the universal solvent. The differences of realities amongst most of us are barely different at all compared to what's out there in the world, yet we have not been able to duplicate one another. Duplication produces an as-isness of the problem. Non-duplication produces persistence and worsening. It takes time and willingness to trace a fellow's opinions back down to source. We are not doing that for each other. A major sit, possibly a major why for the sits in Scientology, is cut calm. If calm lines were open and all data could be traced down, an asisness would occur. Instead, calm is stopped or severely regulated. Unacceptable calm is met with instant sec checks or other investigation. Antagonism, which stems from BPC, see Auditors Rights HCOB, is being misidentified as natter. Calm lines are cut. There is widespread fear of open calm. Freedom of speech does not exist in Scientology, even though it is the creed of the church. If calm lines were really open, as-is-ness would result. In other words, we have the power to handle all our problems if all the warring factions went into calm and got the data on the lines and got it duplicated. Ron says the major way a group is destroyed is by cut calm lines and destruction of ARC amongst members. Please read Essay on Management, Tech, Volume 1. It points out just exactly what is happening step by step to the church and what will happen if it continues. At events, we are constantly told we are growing in numbers. This is not true. The numbers of missions has decreased to almost but not more than half. In LA, there are 48,000 inactive Scientologists and 3,000 active. This is the figure of the financial police. A word about megawatts per hour. The manner in which this tech is being used is creating megawatts per hour, natter, and upset. An undisclosed contra-survival act is only one definition of a megawatt per hour. Look up session megawatt per hour and listen to the tape. Listen to the tape also on the megahertz of nothing. The tape on session MW/H explains that if calm is not allowed or duplicated, an inadvertent MW/H develops. The MWH of nothing tape explains how much more charge there is on a person who is told he has WHs when he doesn't. Also, the MW/H has been repeatedly indicated to the public as their charge. If this were true, i.e. the correct BPC, the indication would make the person better, not worse and more upset. Scientologists are happy to tell their withholds when it is a necessary case action and standard tech is used in getting them. Happy is not the look on the faces of the audience who are told of the grievousness of their crimes and the crimes of their declared friends. Announcing to groups that they are guilty is not a part of Scientology. Have we given up the standard tech? Scientology recognizes first and foremost the basic goodness of all beings, and by doing so, a practicing Scientologist brings those around him into that goodness. A person who addresses another as an N-theta person is bound to get just that back, for that is what will be keyed in by his view of you. None of the various factions are duplicating the other sides and being a terminal. If the N-theta were duplicated and act, it would dissipate. Of course, this letter will cause some restem. The data is not always pleasant, but is that a reason to back away? Instead, go into calm and don't stop until as-isness occurs. Be a good terminal and find good terminals. Be a producer of the most essential tool and result of all Scientology, that of duplication and as-isness. Communication in life postulates change messed, and you can change messed right now by doing that. Refuse to have your calm cut. Don't desert from fear when you know friends have been misdeclared. On the other hand, do not communicate in order to re-stimulate, as that is not communication. Communicate to those capable of duplication and be a terminal to those who are not able to duplicate. Don't buy that you can't perceive a misdeclare. You can. Do not riot or make anyone wrong for the things you have learned about. including David Miscavige, the RTC, I Help, or the financial police. Make wrong does not produce as-isness. If someone is making you wrong, duplicate it and act it while staying in ARC. If you are confronting someone who has committed overts, duplicate that and stay in ARC. Communicate your charge to someone capable of duplication you. Don't just blow it in the face of someone who is on a ridge. Keep communicating. Everything in this letter may not be perfect, and I welcome corrections of data. But is my calm, and you have the right to yours, increased and continued calm by everyone ferrets out the incorrect data, and only communication does it. Demand communication and receive it. Realize there is a WHO above it all, that others are PTS to, and that you may also be PTS to. Grant beingness to it all. Those on heavy ridges and make wrongs need more duplication to get off their ridge than you do. The C of S has been unmocked by 1. Removing the key persons in the orgs and field. 2. By instilling the idea in each faction that the other faction is at fault. 3. By standing back and letting the members destroy each other. The protection of whoever is running our church is invisibility. Who wrote and failed to sign their name to the original drafts of the information letters put out by the RTC? Who sanctioned that person? Who is responsible for such utterly non-LRH viewpoints? The threat of losing our own bridge makes us numb, so we not is what is happening around us. We cut calm lines with our declared friends so that we won't be declared. We don't speak up so that we won't be dealt a similar injustice. Do you know Trey Lotz, for example? Does anyone who knows him honestly believe he is a 2%er, needing explanation? How about David Mayo, handpicked and trained personally by LRH for the senior tech post on the planet? Did Ron pick a 2%er for this post? Have all the flag results until last year thus been delivered to us by a suppressive person? There are hundreds of equally inaccurate declares. How many of you know in your heart that the only reason you don't speak up is you are frightened about your own bridge being taken away if you say what you think in full? Fear is running you. Your leaders have been removed. Your staff and fields have been unmocked. There are many groups springing up delivering the bridge standardly from bottom to top. The reason splinters were not a problem before was there was an intention to stay in one group. It was never because of threats, force, and lawsuits. That intention is being killed, and only that intention would keep us together. Threats have only created splinter groups. If you did a good enough job reforming your church, everyone would come back gladly, more persons than could possibly be imagined. You can write to me if you wish. I cannot be traced, and the legal setup is there to report anyone tampering with your mail to the federal authorities. But send a stamped envelope. Staff wages are low. You on staff, you in management, you in the public, the field, the missions, you who are misdeclared and assigned incorrect conditions, and you in splinter groups are and always have been on the same team. Someone else has caused this, not yourselves. We have the power to as-is. We have theta, this can produce as-isness and truth where we direct our attention. Don't expect Ron to save us. The SO1, right to Ron Live, does not exist. For over 10 years, teams of person have been answering your mail to Ron. The signature is a rubber stamp. He is not running the Church of Scientology. He is not running to our rescue any longer. It is in our hands. Look, communicate. Find out who is running the Church of Scientology. What is the name of the person responsible? Find out why we periodically destroy ourselves. It used to be blamed on the GO. Now Mary Sue is in jail, and the mistakes are blamed on the RTC or the FP. But why have we done these things to ourselves? And WHO, use the tech. Use communication tech. Take care of yourselves. I love you. As is the Ridge, your friend, a Scientologist, Dane Tops.